Hello, Tim.
Hello, how are you?
I'm okay. I'm going to duck away from the screen while I have my sandwich, okay?
Okay.
So you don't have to see me chewing. Have you had lunch?
Yes, I did. Okay.
We just got off an interesting Zoom call. The lady talked about happiness.
Oh, really?
Yeah, from Ollie,
Yeah.
And it was sort of like the happiness is in your mind. You can change your attitude.
Uh-huh. Yeah, well, I kind of agree with that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of dimensions to it. But you gave us some hints and some exercises to do. Smile, call people by their first names,
Right.
those
True.
kind of things.
Yeah. That
Be
makes sense.
silly. Turn off the TV.
Yeah. Avoid the news sometimes. 'Cause generally, whenever I watch the news, I just get in a bad mood. So
There's a lot of them, that whole list.
well, and Caleb's in the kitchen now making homemade falafel.
Wow.
He makes it all the time. He makes
Yeah.
it from scratch.
Yeah. There's usually kits for that, you can usually buy the mix and you
Yes, he does not like the mix. He makes it. He does his own chickpeas, everything.
really? Oh,
Yeah,
maybe
he soaks the chickpeas overnight, and
tell him to publish his recipe for us, would you?
I'll ask him. It's really good. And we both love falafel, so we have it quite a bit. And they freeze really well, so you can make a batch and then put some in the freezer, and then when you're in the mood, you just pull out what you need.
You make them in sandwiches with tahina and
Right. Yep, we do it with the pocket pita,
Do you
or
buy that hummus or do you make your own?
Sometimes he makes his own, sometimes we just buy one. But we like tzatziki. We like to do it with tzatziki.
Oh, tzatziki. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I like the tzatziki sauce. It's more Greek.
Yeah, it is. But we like that kind of flavor with it. Or we'll make a salad. Sometimes we'll make a falafel salad. And to be honest with you, I like falafel so much that I'll just pick one up and just eat it because I like them.
Was that something that you made in your restaurant?
Actually, we did not do them there because we did not have a deep fryer there.
Oh.
This is just something he started doing, here, and he found this recipe that he liked and uses it, and he's tweaked it a little bit, and it's just really, really good. And we both love it. Like, I have to say, falafel is one of my favorite things. If I was on a desert island and could only have 3 foods, I think one of them would be falafel.
Really? Oh, yeah. I like it. I wouldn't say I long for it. It's not the kind of thing that like a hot dog with the sauerkraut or something that I'd say, wow, that's really sounds good. But
yeah, well, see, he likes to cook, so I cook. I don't like it as much as he does, so but I got my first COVID shot last week, so.
Oh, great, yeah. Any effects? Any after effects?
Just my arm was a little sore for 24 hours. I mean, not horribly so. Nothing that a couple, Aleve or Tylenol couldn't take care of. And then, the next day it was perfectly fine. So then I've got my appointment to go back and get my second one a couple weeks. Great. So
yeah, we had ours on Tuesday.
Yeah. And everything went well?
Yeah, very well.
Larry, out of curiosity, ask him which one he got, Pfizer or.
Did you get Pfizer or Moderna, or don't you know?
Moderna.
Moderna. Oh, yeah, we got Pfizer.
Yeah.
You got yours at a hospital, or it's a?
No, actually, our next door neighbor works for hospice.
Oh, right, you told us, yeah.
Yes, and was sponsoring. And even though I'm not of the proper age, she called me and she said, we're going to have leftovers from no-show appointments. So I need to have people come and take these. We can't waste them. She said, can you come? And I said, I'll be there. Don't worry about it.
That's great.
Ask me twice.
Because those don't require as much refrigeration.
Right, right.
They still have expirations on them, I guess.
Right. Yeah, she said we have to use these. She goes, they're like liquid gold. We can't let them go unused. So they told us, if you know people who are interested, call them and get them in here as long as they can come Friday afternoon. I said, I'll be there, no problem.
Well, South Carolina has just lowered their age requirement, I think, to 65 now.
Yeah. I think in Georgia, it's 65. If you're under 65 and you're a caregiver for someone who's 65 or over, then you can qualify. I don't even know. I don't know if they've opened it up to police and fire. The thing I don't understand is why have they not been doing teachers? Why have they not made teachers a priority? I don't understand.
State by state, some teachers have put teachers into the. I was listening yesterday to one of the governors, and apparently each state, has got their own.
Yeah, well, right.
Yeah.
Every state, because there's been no federal coordination, every state has kind of had to figure it out for themselves. So,
yeah, because one of the states that put the teachers in, apparently they've been citing themselves as, the fact that kids now go back to school.
Right.
And I forget what state it was that they had on TV the other day. The governor was talking about it, that he said, except for one school district, which I guess for some reason they had an exemption there or they had some incidents. He said in the entire state, and I wish I remember which one it was. I'm thinking it was Maryland, but I don't remember why. But he said that they've all gone back to school.
Yeah. Well, I think they're trying to get kids back, but it's tough because you can't put everybody at risk. The whole faculty, staff, everybody, the kids, it's crazy. And then I see that there's brand new restaurants opening. I'm like, how are you opening a restaurant under this situation?
I know, that is crazy. That
But
is crazy.
There's 3 or 4 that have just opened recently in Savannah in the last couple of 6 weeks to 2 months. And I'm like, I don't know how you're doing that with the COVID and whatever.
Unless they're doing a takeout business.
No, this is like dine in. And there are people going. I mean, I know there are people going to dine in, but I'm not ready to do that yet.
Well, what did you do with the cafes? Where are they today?
I don't know.
Are you hiding them someplace?
I don't know. Whether they had something else going on or but well, and I'm sorry, I looked at 1:45. I looked at my email, and the Mikveh Israel congregational email had not gone out yet with the links and whatever in it. So
yeah, I just wrote it down and I put it here on my desk, with all of that
right.
link and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know why.
I don't know why she forgets.
I don't either.
I don't know why.
Because it's announced. It's not as if it's not announced.
Right. But like I said, that's out of my hands. I don't have any control over when the email goes out. So
Yeah.
But it's frustrating for me.
I did get smart enough, like I say, to write it down separately. So I do have it right in front of me here for every week, which I hope we can make most weeks. I think we can, especially a gloomy day like today.
Yeah, it certainly is.
Cheer us up, right?
It's supposed to. I saw that we're supposed to get quite a bit of rain starting sometime this afternoon. I don't know exactly when.
I want you to cheer us up with a good Torah reading.
Yeah. Well,
give us something uplifting from the Torah for a change.
Right. Well, this week is this is really uplifting. The Israelites are gonna hear God's voice and seal the covenant and all of that. So that's uplifting. That's a good thing.
That is a good thing. Yeah, that is a good thing.
It's a little bit more than some are very pretty downer and rough, but this one's not so much.
All right, good.
I'm going to get started. I don't know if the cafes are going to join us or whether they've got other plans today, but that's okay.
Do you want to move this to another date and time? You said to get more.
Well, I'm going to discuss it. I'm going to discuss it with the rabbi and see if maybe we should, and see what happens if we do that. I don't know. We'll find out.
Okay.
So anyway, we're in the Torah portion this week, Exodus chapter 18, verse 1 to chapter 20, verse 23. It is called Yitro, which is Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, actually is who the parasha is named for this week. So we all know that we're in the midst of the whole Exodus story, moving toward freedom, toward the land that God has promised to the Israelites, and that this is central to the identity of the Jews as a people. We are set on our path to become this covenant people who will be swearing our allegiance to our one, our only true God. And yet, as important as leaving slavery and bondage behind is to our story, it's in the portion where we really take shape and where we really begin to build what will become the core of the Jewish nation. Because it's in this portion that God reveals himself to us, and he sort of has a one-on-one with his people. Now, different from other revelations, different from other revelations in the Torah and other revelations that we know have occurred to other cultures and other tribes. This is a godly revelation that's not only to one person or to one leader, or one prophet even. This is a revelation that goes out to an entire people who have assembled to witness it and to hear it. It is a revelation that is binding not only to those who are assembled at that moment, yes, it is on them, but it makes it very clear in the Torah that this revelation is binding to the generations of their ancestors who are to come and who are to follow for all time. So that's where we are here. This is very, very significant to the Jewish story. While we have no way of verifying a private revelation, so if I say to you, for example, I had a private revelation from God, how do I verify that to you? Or how do you verify that I'm even telling the truth? But this one that is directed to an entire multitude is much harder to dispute because there are so many people present. So, and this revelation, can this revelation to the Jewish story? While we have no I'm getting feedback somehow. So can this revelation be proven by historical fact? Well, historians say not necessarily, but that's not really what matters here. That's not what really is important here. What is essential is that an entire people give witness to a belief in a powerful, mighty, and merciful God. And in doing so, they choose to say yes to what God is asking of them. The mere fact that all of these people have shaped the course of history and that we still today as Jews cling to the points that are revealed by God gives some credence to the fact that this revelation actually did occur. And while we live under civil governance and we are obliged as Jews to be righteous citizens of the governments that we live under, it's ultimately this law with God that governs and continues to govern Jewish life and Jewish existence. In this sense, Jews live on two planes of existence, according to Rabbi Gunther Plaut in his commentary on this particular Torah portion. He says, and I'm quoting Rabbi Plaut here, he says they, meaning the Jews, live forever after on two planes that are yet one and the same, exposed to men and nations with their demands and exposed to God with his. So we have this sort of two-plane existence. Yes, we are, as Jews, we are told you must live in accordance with the laws of the land in which you are living. But then we have this higher law that comes from God. And both are important because we are to be good citizens of whichever nation we're living in. And yet, this most important revelation, we are told, takes place at Sinai. Neither scholars of history nor scholars of Torah have ever been actually capable of determining where exactly Sinai is. We know that the Israelites were in a desert location. That much we know. It was likely somewhere in what we know today as the Sinai Peninsula. That's what makes most sense. But where precisely is this famous Mount Sinai? Is it impressive? Is it a very tall mountain? Or it is something that is less geographically noticeable? The answer is unclear. And according to our sages, they give a justifiable reason for that, why we don't know where Sinai is. They have told us why we don't really know. It was never intended that Mount Sinai would become a place of pilgrimage or a shrine. It was never meant to be a place for future generations of Jews to visit. The temple in Jerusalem is what would become the core of early Jewish worship and practice, and pilgrimages to Sinai were never ever to get in the way of the temple. It's for this very same reason that our rabbis explain why we have no knowledge of the whereabouts of Moses' burial place. Moses was never set up to be a leader who would become the subject of adoration or the subject of vast pilgrimages. We remember Moses for his leadership and his ability to guide us, to guide our people to the promised land. It's also in this revelation where we take on the responsibility of God's covenant with us as his people. We assent to following God's law as our part of the covenant in exchange for God's blessings and God's guidance. We are taking on the responsibility and the burden of living up to what God has presented to us. It's at this point in the Torah where we are also asked to consider the entire concept of chosenness, the idea of being God's chosen people. And of course, we know that this is a concept that has also caused a great deal of consternation throughout history. In verse 5 of chapter 19, God proclaims, and I'm quoting God here, "You shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples." Just what is God telling us when he says that? The idea of the Jews as God's chosen people has at times throughout history been used by some as a haughty way of saying that we think we are better than others. But it has just as often been hurled at us in the form of anti-Semitism, as if we somehow claim a superiority over other peoples. As we now live in a time in our 21st century that believes in equality for all peoples and that we believe in the merits of many paths to the righteousness to God, how are we supposed to understand this rather complex notion spoken by God himself? First, we must realize that being chosen brings with it certain demands that God has put on us as his chosen people. There are responsibilities that we are required to live up to. These demands are not put on other peoples, and a failure to live up to them for us could bring dire consequences. We know also that it's essential to remember that we also chose God. As God chose us, we as the Jews, we also chose God. We said yes to God. We didn't have to, but we chose of our own free will to answer God in the affirmative. This choice was not imposed upon us. No one made us do it. We did it of our own free will. Midrashic sources tell us also that the reason the Torah was given in the open desert is that it was a public space that was open to all, to every nation. It was Israel who said yes. And in that understanding of chosenness, we play an active part as Jews in the choosing. Our deeds must forever, all after this, display that we did indeed agree to take on the mantle of God's laws, part of which gives rise to the notion of Judaism as a religion of deed more than a religion of creed. For the mitzvot require us to do. We have to take action rather than merely to believe. So it is in this portion that our place in civilization is truly cemented. We will live on as a people, always relatively small in number, as we know, who are eternally bound to in the service to God, eternally expected to follow and live up to God's commandments, and to carry the responsibility of being God's people eternally forever and ever. It will not be easy, and nowhere in the Torah does it say that this will be an easy task, and we know that, but we were never promised that it would be. So that's kind of where we are in this very, very pivotal Torah portion, because this is truly our one of the defining moments of us as a people. When we say yes to God, God chooses us, we choose God. So it's kind of a mutual choosing here. But not only is that saying yes to God, we're taking on all that responsibility of what God expects of us. So I think it's a really, really important Torah portion that highlights the unique place of Jews, and we're small in number. People have argued with me when I tell people, oh, there's 14, 15 million Jews in the world. People who are not Jewish say, oh, no, that can't be. There's more than that. It's one of the world's great religions. I say, so, okay, like we do everything. I say, Google it. Get on your phone and Google it. So they get on their phone and they Google it and they say, you're right. You're right. You're a relatively small number of people in the world. I say, why would I tell you we were if we weren't? But we have had a significant impact upon the history of the world, in spite of the fact that we have never been extremely large in number. Any comments, questions out there? Where would we like to take this whole thing now?
I'll make a comment. You said at the very beginning that what we were taking on was an obligation not only for ourselves at Sinai, but for all future generations. And at that time, was that before the concept of the chosen people? In other words, was he speaking to everybody or just to the Jews that had gone into the desert there? Was this a worldwide message, do you think?
Well, it was a message that was delivered to those who were assembled in the desert. And because the Jews were there and no one else showed up, because according to Midrash, anyone else, any other tribe of people, any other group of people could have shown up and been a part of this as well, but they chose not to or did not show up. So it was directed to us as Jews that this is our covenant. It's not just for now. It's not just for those of you who are physically standing here listening to me at the moment, but for all the generations to follow you. It's, for example, when we tell people who are converting to Judaism, once you have finished your formal conversion process, you stood at Sinai with every other Jew throughout history, because now you are formally a part of the Jewish people. And we make that, it's very important that anybody who converts needs to understand that you were there with everybody else, because that's what God said, that's what God promised, and that's the way that we look at it when somebody chooses to join the Jewish people. So that was directed at Jews because we were the ones who showed up for the revelation. No one else was there.
I've been doing, I gave a few talks recently on Leonard Bernstein. And I did one for a little group that we do with the rabbi, for a congregation, Mikveh Israel, for that Wednesday class that we do. And I'm doing a few others for some other temples and Jewish centers of friends. And one of the things that I looked into was some of his, aside from West Side Story, he wrote a lot of other stuff that was sensational. Right. And I think it's in the Chichester Psalms. The Psalms, of course, is one of the books that's the third book in, the Bible. It's part of the book of writings. And in there, they have several of the Psalms seem to call out at the very beginning for a call to all nations. And they seem to be almost like the opposite of the, what the pronouncement was at Sinai, because now God is not only speaking to the Jewish people through the Psalms, and of course the Psalms have been adopted in Christian religion as well. Oh, yeah. So that they have it. And I was just wondering about, did Judaism change now to say that, it's not only our responsibility, but here's God's voice through the Psalms now. Not that the Psalms carry the weight of the Torah, let's say, but it just seems to me that what they're saying now is they're broadening the sphere, so to speak.
Well, Judaism has always been a religion that believed that we are not the only path to God. We respect that, those who are Christian, those who are Muslim, those who follow some of the Far Eastern religions and faiths also have a path to God. And it is equally valid. It is equally righteous. If people are living righteous lives, basically following the Noahide laws, they have a path to God. We don't exclude them. And if you think back to I don't know the exact wording, I don't have a prayer book in front of me right now, but if you look, for example, at the words that when we pray the Elenu, toward the end of every service, it's in that prayer also where there are a couple of lines that say we pray and wait for the day when all nations will recognize that you are the God, the one God, that you are the sovereign of all. So we do look to this idea where everybody will accept God as being the one God, but yet we're not out there specifically asking them to join us. And I don't think that as Jews we ever excluded, because even in the Torah, we see how people come along with the Israelites and with the Hebrews and ultimately convert and follow the God of the Hebrews or God of the Israelites. So it's something where we never left people out, but as an entire people, an entire group, tribe, if you want to call it that, we went and said yes to God, and we stood there and listened to God's voice, God's words, and said, okay, we're going to do this. Okay, we promise you that we will follow up and we will follow through, which is a pretty, when you think about it, that's a big promise. It really is.
Can I ask a question? Do you know who Plout was? I know we hear his commentaries all the time. And was he a Reform rabbi?
Yes, he was a Reform rabbi.
Modern? Is he modern?
Yes, he died. Don't quote me on this, but I want to say like in the 90s, like the 1990s. I mean, he was very much a modern Reform Jew, modern Reform Jewish thinker. Clearly, with his Torah commentary, very well respected. I want to say that he served a major Reform synagogue in Toronto for a time. I don't remember what the name of the big Reform synagogue up there is. I want to say maybe Holy Blossom Temple. But he was there, and I don't know other congregations that he served. But yes, he was very well respected and well known as a modern 20th century Torah scholar, so much so that that's the Reform commentary that we use in Reform synagogues for Torah study. And when you go to services that you get to follow the reading, and the rabbis reading the Torah and then the English reading as well. So yeah, I mean, I don't know a lot about his personal life, but yes, he's very, very well respected.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said about pilgrimages and shrines. I mean, we do revere, the wall of the temple, and we do revere, certain graves that are in Israel or other places even, as holy sites, and people do take pilgrimages to them. I remember when we were in Israel, we were quite moved one time. We were in the Sinai desert, and I think it was supposedly the
Rachel's grave.
Was it Rachel's grave, or I thought it was Maimonides? Maimonides might have been buried in Spain, but people came, and there were women that came there, and they were actually weeping at the site. These were pilgrimages. They were people that had taken a migration, and I thought it was very, very moving, that they went to this particular site. But yet there seems to be this, I don't know, maybe it's a part of human nature that's innate in us that wants to find out, we believe in faith, but we want to see where is that mountain,
Right.
And I know, like Bruce Feiler, in his Walking the Bible, which you probably have seen and read, and he basically takes you to a place that possibly could be, and he says, it would be hard to sustain that many people on the mountain and even on the valley below there. And I mean, it just doesn't make sense as far as the numbers, which we know anyway could be, numbers are very spurious there. So I think there's this innate desire to say, we believe shrines, and of course you can make arguments, for either way of it. But I do like the idea of having a particular, of knowing where it is.
Well, I think as humans, you're right. I think there are many of us as humans who it becomes more real to us when there's a particular place or a particular something that we can actually see and we can touch and whatever, because we don't always do real well with mental nebulous kind of things. I mean, we have the ability to think things through, and we have the ability in our minds to believe in something, but I think something tangible makes it more real for us. And yet, by the same token, as a faith community or a religion, Judaism doesn't really seem to put a great deal of value we don't command that everybody must go to Jerusalem and say a prayer at the wall. I mean, of course, we want to see it. It's important. And when you're there, it's very moving. It was for me. But there's no like some commandment that at some point before your death, you must go to Jerusalem and you must at least one time pray at the wall, as in some religions there are. And in Catholicism, they make grand pilgrimages to places like Lourdes, where the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared and where, miracles have supposedly taken place of people being healed. And so, millions upon millions of people go to these places, and, people make pilgrimages to Rome to be blessed by the Pope and to have, a mass said by the Pope, because we don't have that kind of hierarchy in Judaism, and certainly not in Reform Judaism. We don't have a someone to go to for a special service or blessing or whatever. And because we don't bless things either. I mean, we don't have rosary beads and things of that sort, and even if you I wear a Star of David, but I haven't taken it to the rabbi to have him perform some sort of a special blessing on it. Whereas in Catholicism, if you are wearing a religious medal or a cross or something, you are supposed to take it to the church, and you are supposed to have the priest say a special blessing on it to make it holy or whatever. That's not a Jewish concept. And while the wall is part of our history and so important, do we think of it as really like a holy thing, or is it more historic or whatever? I mean, I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing it out there. But it just doesn't seem to be a significant part of Judaism that we make pilgrimages to a shrine or to a grave. If we're there, we see it, we want to see it, it's important historically, but it's not ingrained as something we must do. It's not a commandment. It's not one of the mitzvot that we have to follow at some point in our lives.
Yeah. I think even Rabbi Schneerson never even went to Israel.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't believe he ever stepped foot in Israel, actually. So, he was always a diaspora rabbi. I could be wrong on that, but I'm reasonably sure I've heard that even from Hasidic rabbis, because I've asked them the question.
Well, and it's interesting because when we were in Israel 2 summers ago, his picture's all over the place. I mean, he may not.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you see
his movement is not there, but he personally
right.
saw no reason to actually do a pilgrimage to Israel.
Right.
And interesting.
Well,
May have to Google that.
Yeah, I mean, that very likely could be true. I mean, Jews, are born, they die, and some have the chance to go to Israel and some don't. And I mean, it's a great experience. It's a very moving experience too. I mean, there's something about stepping off the plane and being on Israeli soil that just in and of itself is a moving experience. And then when you see, the wall and other historic sites when you're there, it's very profound. But there are many people who live, die, and don't ever get the opportunity to do that. And maybe some of them don't even want to. I don't know. I mean, I've never actually talked to anyone Jewish who said they didn't want to go to Israel. There are a few people who said at different times they were afraid because being surrounded by enemies and such as that, but it wasn't that they didn't want to go.
Yeah, it's not compulsory like Mecca or the pilgrimages in Islam and like you say in certain other religions.
Right. Yeah, we don't have a compulsory, some point you have to go to Mecca. We don't do that. I don't know the reason for that, but I know that like if you read Abraham Joshua Heschel's book on the Sabbath, he's very, very clear in that book time and time again that as Jews, what we consider holy and what we consider like, when we say blessings, or even when we say Kiddush on Friday nights, we're not blessing the wine, really. What we are doing is we are making the space that we're in holy. And he's very adamant that we bless, time and space, not things, not physical things. So when we're gathered, it's holy because of why we are there and why we are gathered there. The space becomes holy. It doesn't have to be a synagogue necessarily. It doesn't have to be a sanctuary. And the time is holy. I mean, his whole, concept of the Sabbath is not about the physical aspect of the things, but about really sanctifying the time that we have, the 25 hours that we get for Shabbat every single week.
It's interesting because we are a nomad people.
Right.
And perhaps that is one of the reasons that we had to pick up quickly a lot of times and leave or transport our stuff to different places. And yet, we don't have a Mecca, that we must go to. And
Right.
they are nomad people as well. But perhaps they weren't as nomadic because they did have, like in Turkey for a long time, or even Spain for a long time, they were there and quite prominent. The
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's, one of the common things we hear about Jews is that, we're the people of the book. That's one of the common names they give to us because we have always put a great deal of emphasis on learning and on education. And I remember a rabbi in Ohio saying that one of the reasons for that is, whatever you put into your head, whatever you know, whatever your knowledge is that you have gained, they can take away your stuff. In the midst of a pogrom, or as you have to pick up and flee and go from point A to point B, you may not be able to take the stuff with you, but they can't take what's out of your head. Whatever knowledge you have, whatever you've gained, whatever you've learned, your education goes with you no matter where you are. And
But yeah,
so,
we do have the concept of the promised land,
right,
which is, so overriding in our, of course, you need a nation to go to. And I think that was sort of the basis of Zionism at the time, of a safe haven, so to speak, a refuge. And, it's almost different. And I know the whole business of the settlements is based on this promised land, it depends who promised who, which version of, the holy books you look at of,
right,
who made the bigger promise, which version of the reading are you going to take it at?
right, because
So, so
we
in
have
other words, the whole place is really a pilgrimage,
yeah,
to go to get to the promised land. And many people, I think, still believe they want to be buried in Israel at the Mount of Olives or, someplace,
right. I think that what we have to realize is there are two peoples who claim the same basic territory, and that it's holy to them, that it's significant to them historically, religiously, and yet we've not figured out a way to do this harmoniously. To say that yes, it's important to us as Jews, it's important to you as Muslims, and we have to figure out how to make it work. Clearly, the state of Israel declared in 1948 didn't work in that sense. I mean, we're a state and we're thriving and we're doing very well in the state of Israel, but it did not end the conflict. It did not end we think it's our land, we think it's our land, and continues to this very, very day. We are still, I don't know if you've been paying attention, this is kind of bringing it a little bit more up to date, but did you read any of the articles that were so critical of Israel in the last couple of weeks, claiming that Israel was denying the COVID-19 vaccine to the Palestinians?
I didn't see they were denying it, but I just thought I didn't know the underpinnings of it. I don't know if I saw the word denying, but I saw words to the effect that the distribution seemed to heavily favor,
But those
the
Arab people were not citizens of Israel, and that was the difference.
well, it could be citizens or they could be residents. Now, a citizen is different than a resident in Israel, and I'm not talking about the people in Gaza, but I'm
That's what they
talking
were
about.
talking about.
Yeah, Gaza, I think, is different, and I think the World Health Organization has to step in there.
Well, but what's interesting is then if I was looking at some things directly out of Israel and journalists in Israel, and they said it became sort of an anti-Israeli thing because initially the Israeli government offered to take vaccines into both Gaza and the West Bank.
I see, yeah.
And the governments, Hezbollah, who's in charge of, I guess, I can't remember who's in charge of what anymore, Hamas, said no. They denied it.
Mm-hmm.
Because they didn't want to be seen as taking it from the Israelis. They wanted to do it themselves. Well, okay, but here's a chance to get your people vaccinated. Why are you saying no? Now, I guess in the recent days, they've backed off and there are some vaccines that are now going into the West Bank.
But aside from the West Bank, in Israel itself, was your comment more in Israel itself, though, that as far as the distribution was denied to, excuse me one second, Jay, was it denied to Arabs or Israeli citizens that were not Jewish?
No, I think the people who were living directly inside Israel's borders, the problem was when you were going and, crossing the Green Line into the West Bank, or you were crossing into Gaza, the Israeli government was very willing to go in there and offer the vaccines. And it was the people in charge of those two areas that said, no, we don't want you to come in and do that.
Okay. Because there are, as you know, like 1.5 million, almost 2 million Israeli Arabs
Oh, right.
that live there that have not become citizens because they don't want to pledge their allegiance to Israel. And I was
Right.
wondering if that was part of, that's some of the numbers that I had heard. Now, some of it could be, just the fact that, well, we don't trust Israel. It's a conspiracy,
Right.
we don't want to be part of it. And, so the statistics may show the true numbers,
Yeah.
that they've been vaccinated at a lower rate, but it could be of their own desire.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Israel has probably comparatively done one of the best jobs of rolling out the vaccine to their people. They've done it with a very organized from the top down kind of system, which seems to be working pretty effectively from what I can see. The last number I heard is they were getting close to like 65% of the population with the vaccine, hoping to get toward 80 very soon.
Has the Orthodox population complied?
Some of them have and some of them haven't, because we know there's that issue too. We've had that issue here in the United States, as well.
Well, they have not tested for fertility yet.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of the Orthodox are kind of skeptical about.
Right.
Vaccinating the kids or
Right.
vaccinating people of childbearing age.
Right. Well, I know, because there is some concern as what kind of impact is it going to have, on a female who could she not bear children, or even on a male, is he going to be able to father children? I mean, I guess those are some of the things that are, a little bit up in the air, not entirely certain at this point, given the speed at which the vaccine was rolled out, I guess that's a valid concern. If you are planning a family and you are planning, for children, you do have to take that into account for sure.
Well, there are many people, even in the United States here, that very much against vaccines for children. First it was the mercury in the vaccine, and then it was other effects that led to, supposedly they thought it led to certain disabilities in children. And I think most of that's been disproven, but nonetheless, the story lingers on.
Oh, there's a very strong anti-vaccine movement here in the United States, and very vocal. I mean, and it includes some, Hollywood celebrities and things of that sort who have kind of given them some, vocal power as well. I don't know. I mean, I got my first shot, so I guess I'm okay with it. I don't feel like there's like a little microchip floating through me. I know some people were worried that that's what's going to happen, that Bill Gates was trying to plant microchips in everybody.
Well, you do find in, speaking to, many of the, or hearing about many of the Orthodox people, whatever they say is that their words are always, well, it's God's will. It's
Right.
like we have no control over it. God will protect us. And, it's that kind of a faith.
Right.
That they say that what will be, and it just seems to be so much the opposite of what we consider to be free will or our own determination to do the right thing. And I can never reconcile that in my own mind. How they.
And I also think, okay, God gave these great scientific minds and minds in the field of medicine and whatever, the ability to figure these things out. So once they do figure them out, and once they have used the great knowledge they have, and I'm not a scientist and I don't understand completely how, all of it works all the time, but, look how we have been able to overcome other, serious diseases. I mean, I was of the age I remember getting the sugar cube in school.
Mhm.
When I was I want to say it was like first grade or something like that. And they brought it into the schools and they took us down to the auditorium and lined us all up, and we walked by and it was like, woohoo, we're getting a sugar cube. It was a vaccine. And I don't remember there being any real big deal about it, other than this was going to be good for the entire nation, for everybody.
Yeah, I was just reading a little bit about George Washington and the smallpox.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was amazing there that, it started because they needed soldiers for the Revolutionary War, and they were losing more soldiers for smallpox than they were during some of the battles. And he basically instituted this compulsory thing. And I think even after he became president, they had instituted this basically quarantine unless you had the smallpox vaccination. So I think there were, limits on freedom as far back as Washington's, inauguration. That was
Well,
part of the policy, and people complied apparently. Either
well,
that, or you can go leave your house.
I'm not so sure we're not going to get to something. I mean, given what this pandemic has done worldwide, there's been very few places that have been spared from it. To travel, like if you want to do international travel, are they going to require not only a passport, a valid passport, but some sort of something that indicates that you have been vaccinated against COVID-19? Is that going to become something that is required to, fly out of the borders of the United States into another nation in Europe or Asia or Africa or whatever? I could actually see that coming down the pike.
And there's a lot of unanswered questions, even as to the efficacy of the vaccination over long term.
Right.
How long will it last, and what level of antibodies you really need, and some of the new strains and things of that nature. I mean, it just, the questions just keep outnumbering the answers.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I read one said that some of the scientists, the people, the medical people, think that this is something where you may have to go in for a booster, every couple years to boost it back up. That, so the antibodies, that you have stay strong enough to fight off.
Well, I think they are working on the booster right now for one of the vaccines. I read that, it may even be the J&J one, which isn't even out yet, but I think they're working on a booster to look at that one for this additional variation, the South African or
Right.
English variation, or whatever you want to call it, variant of the virus.
Yeah. Like you said, there's just a lot we don't know. I mean,
Just getting back to the to Exodus now. Where are we in Exodus? Where did we leave off here?
We are
got the 10 Commandments yet?
Yes. Well, no. Well, yes, this portion interestingly cuts off sort of mid 10 Commandments. It deals with the first 3 or 4, stops the Torah portion, and then we'll move on to the others in the next Torah portion. But the commandments, yes, they are clearly have been given to the people.
But what do you mean it stops at the first 3 or so?
It goes into talking about the first, detailing some elements of the first 3, and then kind of the Torah portion cuts off, and then we're going into the next Torah portion.
That's unusual. It's like a cliffhanger.
It is. I thought it was very odd that it was kind of that way, but then when you look at what the people say, there is a clear division of the commandments that deal with God versus those that deal with humans and society.
How were the commandments delivered? Does Moses actually read them to the people? Does Aaron read them, or do they assemble a big group of people and with a microphone?
I don't think they had microphones back then, but or mega.
They call it assembly. I mean, is what I'm thinking is.
It's Moses telling the people. It's very weird because it's almost like he says one word and then the word sort of represents the commandment. Because I was reading a lot of the commentary on the way the commandments are delineated in the Torah, because of course they come up again later on in Deuteronomy in a slightly different fashion, and how as Jews versus Christians, etc., we have taken what's there and all have sort of put our own little spin on them. And they said that technically it's like one word sort of represents the entire commandment. Now, and some say that's really all that Moses had to tell the people and they understood, which doesn't really make sense to me, but okay, if maybe it did. Or did he really have to, really read it out to them, and so they would hear the entire sentence or sentences or whatever? I don't know, but I know that the first part of the commandments that they deal with are the ones that are dealing with God and of course the Sabbath and everything. And then the second part of the commandments are those that are dealing with how we treat humanity, about not coveting and about, honoring father and mother and things of that sort.
And later on during their journey, which is either in the next portion or next several portions, they talk about the building of the tabernacle, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's where the commandments are to be placed, even
Yeah.
though it's a temporary tabernacle while they're in the desert.
Yes.
And
And
they do say this is to be presided over. Is there a mention that only one person can go in there, like Aaron?
like the holy is like the high
The
priest and such.
holies? Do you recall if that was described there?
But I haven't gotten that far into it at this point. Well, I guess when we get there, we'll know. And I don't remember off the top of my head. I know that, that it's meant to be, specifications are given for the building, and that it does have to be something that can be carried so that it can be portable, and that it is to house the commandments. And then, a lot of historian scholars think that this is sort of course, the forerunner to what becomes the Ark in the synagogue, where we keep the Torah. So this was the first idea of building a special, or having a special place for what is the word of God. In this case, the Ten Commandments, then ultimately the word of God in the Torah. And so that's something that sort of carries over even when we become rabbinic and we go to synagogue Judaism versus temple Judaism.
Yeah, I was reading where one rabbi or one commentator, historical commentator, said that, aside from the commandments, one of the great gifts that, and the day of rest and things like that, but the great gifts that Judaism has given the world was the idea of a place of worship, and that was brought on more by the diaspora than any place else, which became a community kind of place, that it didn't have to be one particular place of worship. I mean, it was kind of reconciling the idea that, well, the temple was destroyed, the religion is gone, but that almost became a good thing in that, now we have these all sorts of, and they're different, but all sorts of communities where people can get together and, practice their faith in whatever variant of the religion they want to. So obviously people put different spins on it, but it was an interesting idea that we were the ones that brought out the idea of the synagogue. So I guess it might have been churches or other places of worship.
I think a lot of people don't realize too, is okay, so we had during, the era of the temple, and when the temple was the central, point of Judaism, there were people worshiping in other places, because not everybody, there were pockets of Jews outside of Jerusalem and outside the area who were worshiping, but they couldn't get to the temple. It wasn't feasible. And so sort of like an early concept of a synagogue before we even became rabbinic, and we turned to the synagogue, because they had to have a way of having a connection and worshiping, but they couldn't do it in Jerusalem. So I read something historically that there was an early form of a synagogue somewhere in the south of Egypt, where a group of Jews would get together and pray. They couldn't get to Jerusalem, but they had their rituals. Now, were their rituals exactly what was going on in Jerusalem? Was it? Probably not, because nothing was written down at this point. We didn't have a standard, like we do now. We have a standard liturgy that we follow. It's in a prayer book and whatever. That didn't exist back then. So each group was doing it probably a little bit differently, for whatever made sense for them and wherever they were living at the time, which is interesting, because we hear all about temple Judaism and that, sacrifices at the temple and the Holy of Holies and the whole thing. But we have to remember there were Jews who were living beyond where they could get there. Yeah. So it wasn't feasible for them to be there.
Yeah, I don't know if you sat in when the rabbi had the tour guide from Israel talk after services a couple of weeks ago, and he had mentioned that as well, that, there were synagogues that were, outside of Jerusalem. And he tried to explain a little bit about the relationship of those synagogues to the temple, before the destruction, and this was the second temple, with the Maccabees and all, and, what was the relation? And he kind of thought that it wasn't quite the same relationship. It wasn't like, a pope sitting in the synagogue in Jerusalem, edicting, what took place. And he thought these were more of a social gathering place, plus prayer. So they're more of a community center, or JCC or JEA, just using my own analogy of it.
And I think you're right, because when we were in Israel the 2 summers ago, I'm trying to remember where we were, but we were in ruins. We were looking at ruins and archaeology and whatever, and they believed that there had been a mikvah and a synagogue. But what it was carved out of the stone looked very much like a place where people would just sort of sit and chat. sit and talk. It wasn't carved as a place of like formality where there would be a formal sort of religious ceremony or service or whatever, but a place where people could gather and talk and discuss and whatever. And maybe very likely early synagogues were just a place for the people to, like you said, be like a JCC, a place for people to come together and talk and socialize and maybe say some prayers or whatever. But it wasn't a formalized sort of ritual service like rabbinic Judaism would ultimately come to have, which is fascinating when you think about it, because, if each little group, was kind of doing its own thing, but yet still preserving the concepts of Judaism in their own way, it really does make for a fascinating history. I have this article that I'm going to give it out in Judaism 101 when we get to Jewish history. And it talks about how Jewish history is the hardest history to teach and to understand.
Well, there's a lot of gaps and there's a lot of years.
Right. And it's not the Torah. Everybody knows the Torah is not a history book. So the Torah is not the history. And there are gaps. And then we have like Josephus, who wasn't Jewish, but was trying to write what he could about Judaism. And so can we trust what he said, or should we look at it sort of with a, side eye a little bit? I don't know. There's like you said, there's just a lot we don't know. There's just a lot of space or gaps where we don't have any way to fill it in with details.
Well, Egyptian history goes back, at least as far as that. And we were in Egypt a couple of years ago and had the tours there, and it is mind-boggling, to try and understand the different dynasties and, who built this pyramid and who built this tomb. And it just is very, very complex. And I'm sure what we don't know about all the other civilizations, if you went into South America and you looked at those civilizations, and, even in American history, they just keep unearthing things that are just, so startling, I would say.
Right.
There's a new book that I just saw that one of the libraries in New Jersey was saying for one of their book discussion groups they were going to have about George Washington actively pursuing one of the runaway slaves that he had.
Oh, really?
And because that slave had been promised, even though it was a slave that had been in his family for like 30 years and she had made her way almost to freedom, and he was actively pursuing her because she had been promised as a gift to his granddaughter or something like that. It just paints an entirely different picture on, I'm not blaming what I would say blaming, but it just, I don't know how historically accurate it is. I'm assuming it is. It's well researched in
right.
the files, and we know about Jefferson, but these stories have basically been, in the underground kind of thing.
Well, right. And one of the things that we know is that, something new, some new revelation comes up about something historic, and it's like, wow, that just, changes our whole attitude about the person or the thing or the event or whatever it is that they, but I guess that's the job of archaeologists and historians, is to put the pieces together as best they can when they find them. And, we still, like, even with all that, there's still so much we just don't know.
One of the rabbis I remember years ago, at least 20 or 30 years ago, in the Los Angeles area, he had written sort of a controversial piece, an op-ed sort of piece on it really doesn't matter whether the Exodus took place or not.
Mm-hmm.
He says that was basically, we don't have evidence, to the degree that people would be satisfied that it did take place. But he said it really doesn't matter. It's the freedom. It's the whole idea of, us departing from a country and forming our own country, and that's the important thing. And
I remember that controversy.
It was very controversial at the time, and
yes.
A lot of people say, "Wow, I'm aghast at that."
Right, yeah. But we don't really know it. But it's the same thing in Christianity. How much do they really allegedly know about Jesus? And his time on earth, if he, because there have been some Christian theologians who have suggested that, a lot of what allegedly Jesus did isn't true, and there's no basis for it anywhere. you know.
Yeah.
And then you have people who are, I don't know which branch of Christianity, but you know, that are appalled at the idea that Jesus may have been married and had children. Well,
Yeah.
why wouldn't he have? And what's so appalling about that anyway?
Yeah, I was speaking to somebody the other day about who was of the Mormon faith, and we had friends that were Mormon, and I find the book very, very interesting, but totally, so beyond the realm of belief. But yet, you go to the Mormon historical museum, not the church. You can't allow it in there in
Right,
Salt Lake,
right.
but the historical area there, and they have, for example, a replica of Thor Heyerdahl's raft. To show that it is possible to cross the Atlantic.
Right.
They have boxes there supposedly that were of the style that Joseph Smith had found, in which he found these tablets which contained the Book of Mormon in it. So I think, like I said, that there's always been this desire for historical evidence. Yeah, can you prove it, kind of thing.
Right.
And
Oh, of course.
it's rational, but at the same time, we want to have faith, and this conflict between rationality and faith is always something that some people move one way than the other.
Right.
Can you live in both worlds is really the problem.
I think you kind of have to. I mean, you probably lean a little more one way or the other. I mean, I'm a highly skeptical person. I know that about myself. I that's just me. It's my nature. But I'm not so skeptical as that I can't accept some things as a matter of belief, faith, whatever you want to call it. But I think as humans, there is this need for something that we can really sort of reach out and touch, and that we have to have the definitive, proof of whatever happened or whatever, or the person existed or whatever. And for some of this, it's just not there, and I don't know that it will ever be there.
Yeah. I don't think the answers will ever be there.
No, it's fun to speculate. And that's part of what keeps our minds going, is because we kind of try to fill in as best we can with what we don't know and speculate as to what makes the most sense, even if we don't know.
All right, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much, Tim.
All right, you Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, and we will see you again very, very soon.
Okay, and good luck with everything. Stay safe, stay healthy.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.